Welcome to Unit 8, Lesson 1, and welcome back. Hope everyone had a really great, awesome, amazing spring break. Can't wait to hear about all of the things that you guys got to do in your attendance question. So let's go ahead and get started. So today's lesson is about the cellular membrane. So our lesson objective is that students should be able to describe the components of the cell membrane and also be able to differentiate between the different methods of cellular transport. So we all know that all of our body is made up of cells. We have billions of cells throughout our life. And the thing that keeps us all together, what keeps us all from being bombarded with toxins and whatnot, is this handy dandy thing called the cell membrane. It surrounds the cell. So let's get into today's lesson about what the cell membrane does. Well, before we get into actually what the cell membrane is, we have to remember what is homeostasis. So you possibly remember this, but maybe not because it was forever and a day ago, so I'm going to review it. So homeostasis is a process by which organisms get to keep their inside conditions relatively constant despite all the changes going on in the external environments. So for example, if it's really, really hot outside, what is your body going to do to try and cool off? Well, it's going to produce sweat beads, and then that sweat will evaporate off of your skin, which makes you feel cooler. If it's super duper cold outside, then you're going to shiver. Your muscles are going to contract because a byproduct of muscular contraction is the production of heat. So, homeostasis, when you're out of balance, your body is going to do everything in its power to bring you back into balance. Otherwise, you could die. Not to be dramatic, but death is possible. So the cell membrane is actually what's in charge of maintaining homeostasis in each cell, because cells are just kind of floating around in what's called interstitial fluid, and sometimes the fluid has things in it that are not beneficial for the cell and that can take the cell out of homeostasis. So the cell membrane's job is to regulate what's entering, what's exiting the cell to make sure that we stay inside of homeostasis. Because anything that wants to enter the cell, such as water or nutrients, and anything that wants to exit the cell, such as waste products, has to go through this cellular membrane. Some things that I want to go ahead and point out to you. Notice the structure of the cell membrane. Notice that structure, right? You see we have two layers of it. You see that there's things. Cool, we're going to enter it. So a real life analogy. So let's say you and your friend are trying to go to the hottest party of the year. Y'all, it's 5:10 p.m. I don't understand why there was a bell. Maybe it's for attendance recovery. I don't know. So outside the hottest party of the year, a bouncer is going to check the list, right? It's checking the list. If you're cool and you're famous, you get to come in. But if you're just a random, you're going to be stopped at the door. Well, think of the plasma membrane as the bouncer of the club. The cell is the club, and the bouncer is the cell membrane. Okay, it's going to stop, it's going to let some things come in, but it's going to stop other things from getting in. So the cell membrane surrounds all cells in your body. It is what's known as a phospholipid bilayer, aka two layers of phospholipids. This is a phospholipid, one layer of it, that's a phospholipid, the second layer of it. Okay? Basically what they do is they allow nutrients to enter and stop waste and toxins from entering. This is what's known as selective permeability. So kind of like how the name sounds, selective permeability means that it selects what is permitted to enter. So the membrane is actually going to control when and how things enter, while it's going to block other things from entering, just like a bouncer. So let's look into what is the membrane structure. Well, this is what it looks like. So for demonstration purposes, they always draw it as a flat thing, but we all know that cells, in a lot of cases, are going to be rounder, so it's going to surround a cell. Okay, so pretend like this is kind of curvy. As you can see, we have our phospholipids, these little purple dudes with their tails, and they're in a bilayer. Bi means two. So they're in a bilayer. So there's two layers. There's that layer and there's that layer. Notice that the tails are oriented towards each other and the heads are oriented away from each other. Okay. Notice that there's not just phospholipids. We have some other things in here that we're going to talk about. Okay. So what is the phospholipid? Well, its structure is There's a hydrophilic head. Hydrophilic, philic means loves, attracted to, while the tails are going to be hydrophobic. So a phobia, such as arachnophobia, fear of spiders, trypophobia, fear of holes. A hydrophobic tail is going to hate water. It's going to be repelled by water. Okay, here's what it kind of looks like in 3D. You notice we have our phospholipids, all the heads are down here, and then we have our tails that are all oriented towards each other. So the hydrophilic heads are on the outside of the membrane, and the tails are in the inside of the membrane. This makes for a very interesting environment, basically. There are things that can totally pass through the hydrophilic heads, but those tails are going to stop it. So that is how it basically is the bouncer of the cell. So there are these extra little proteins that are all found within the cell membrane. And let's talk about what they are. So peripheral protein. Peripheral protein, what it sounds like. You know what your peripheral vision is, right? Your peripheral vision is those outskirts of your vision. Something's on the periphery is on the outskirts, while peripheral protein is going to be on the outskirts of the membrane. Its job is to basically help with facilitated diffusion. What's facilitated diffusion? Don't worry, we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, then we have what are called integral proteins. What the name sounds like. They're proteins that are integral. They are integrated inside of the membrane. Their job is to act as a bridge or a channel for really large molecules to use. Because obviously, really large molecules can't squeeze through there. They're going to need a channel or a bridge, someone to help them get in. Okay, and then last but not least, this handy dandy thing called cholesterol. You probably have heard about trying to watch your cholesterol, or that it's important to watch it to maintain it. Well, that's because essentially it's what causes your cell membranes to become really hard or really soft. And obviously, you don't want cell membranes that are really hard, because then the cell can't do what it needs to do. It can't flex and move as it needs to. And you also don't want something that is really, really soft and flaccid, because then it will just flop all about and could possibly be destroyed. So all of these things are really, really important. We have our phosphate heads and tails on our phospholipids. We have cholesterol. We have peripheral proteins, and of course, integral proteins. We also have what are called glycoproteins, that are aka cellular ID cards, but we don't have to know that at this level of biology. Yeah. So there are things that can pass through the membrane easily. They can walk through. They're on the list. Those are nonpolar molecules and really, 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 really small molecules that are just going to sneak on through. Then there are things that can pass actively, which means that they have to use energy, right? If something is active, it's using energy. That's going to be things like polar molecules and really, really large molecules. So again, remember that we're talking about things that are passing through this, okay? Passing through that bilayer, or passing through a protein channel. So there are actually two types of transport. We have passive and we have active. Passive just means no energy is used. So another thing, you might have heard of this if you're worried, or if you are someone who looks into maybe stocks or buying things like that. That's known as a passive income, because you're not spending any energy doing it. It's just somehow you're getting that money. Versus active is something that's going to require energy. Okay. And in biology, we haven't gotten to this yet. It won't be the next lesson, but the lesson after that, when we talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, you're going to learn about ATP, which is just basically biological energy, currency of energy in biological systems. So there are different subtypes of passive transport and subtypes of active transport that we're going to get into. Here's just a little sneak peek what we're going to get into. First things first, I want to ask you this question. Which of these is a function of the cell membrane in all cells? Is it A, producing cellular nutrients, B, maintaining homeostasis, C, neutralizing chemicals, or D, preserving cellular wastes? Good job. Maintaining homeostasis, right? It is the bouncer. It maintains what is supposed to be in the cell and what is not supposed to be in the cell. Let's get into the types of transport. So here's a scenario that we all hopefully have experienced before in our life. So, as your grandma bakes muffins, the house slowly filled with the aroma of those yummy baked goods. How can you smell them? Well, the particles from the muffins are in the air and moving randomly from the oven towards your nose. All molecules, whether that's air or water or cleaning supplies, whatever, all molecules are going to move randomly through this process that's known as diffusion. Diffusion is a movement of molecules from an area with a lot of their particles, a really packed, dense area, to an area where there are only a few. So it's going to spread out naturally. It's a natural process that happens just because of physics. Okay, here's what it might look like. So in this experiment, someone took food coloring, they put a drop of it into the water at the very top. But obviously, we know that it doesn't just stay up at the top, right? It's going to spread out. It's going to go from that area of high concentration where it first was dropped off at, and it's going to spread out to areas of low concentration. That is a naturally occurring process known as diffusion. Also, say you have like some sort of perfume. I don't have perfume with me here on campus, but I do have a handy dandy Lysol spray. So, obviously, can you hear it? There's lots of Lysol particles inside of here. And whenever I spray, do all the Lysol particles stay right here where I just sprayed them at? No, they're not going to. They're going to diffuse. They're going to spread from an area of high concentration out to an area of low concentration. That is known as a diffusion. It is a naturally occurring process that happens in liquids, gases, everything. So I kind of gave you a hint to this. This is something called a concentration gradient. So a concentration gradient is going to be a difference in concentration of a dissolved substance in a solution. So I'm going to show you a picture of a gradient. So this right here is a gradient. You might have seen this if you ever work with designs or anything like that. That's a gradient, right? So you notice that like it just kind of smooth, whatever. Not important. So a gradient is a difference in concentration of a dissolved substance in a solution. So naturally, whenever you have a membrane, a semi-permeable, a selectively permeable membrane, on one side of the membrane, there's going to be one concentration of molecules. And on the other side of the membrane, there's going to be a different concentration of molecules. That's just the way that it works. Right? And in this picture right here, we can tell that this one right here is a high concentration. How do I know that's a high concentration? Well, look at it. There's lots of molecules here. Versus over here, this is going to be a low concentration because there's only a few molecules over here. That is what's known as a concentration gradient. It's a gradient. It's a difference in concentration. So let's do an example. So let's look right here. Side 1. So we have side 1 and we have side 2, and then we have a selectively permeable membrane. What is the concentration of side 1? Yeah, okay, I just basically gave you the answer. Whatever. Side 1 is a concentration of 8. How do I know that? Well, I just counted up the number of molecules here. There's 8 of them. Side 2 has a concentration of 3. I know that because I just counted it up. Sometimes in problems, you'll have to look at it and count. Sometimes in problems, they'll tell you 8 moles. They'll tell you the numbers. So which of these sides has the higher concentration, do you think? Well, the higher concentration is definitely going to be side 1. And how do I know that? Well, there's just more particles over here. So that has the higher concentration, that has a lower concentration. This is how the concentration gradient goes. It goes from high to low. Okay, that's how the concentration gradient, listen to me. This is how the concentration gradient goes. It goes from high to low. Okay? So molecules want to have as much space as possible, right? They just naturally do it. You saw that example with dropping the food coloring in the beaker and it spread out. And then you just saw the example with this. You also have experienced the example when you've smelled food from someone cooking in the kitchen, you can smell it all the way in your room. That's diffusion, right? Those molecules naturally want to have as much space. They're going to spread out. So they're going to go from the area of high concentration and they're going to spread out to areas of lower concentrations. They're going to reach what is called dynamic equilibrium, which means it doesn't mean that they're... So what students sometimes might think is that it goes from high concentration to low concentration and then they just stop. No, they don't stop. They're going to constantly move, right? They're going to constantly move, but they're going to move in equal ways. That's what's known as dynamic equilibrium. So it's equilibrium, they're equal, but it's dynamic. Dynamic means that there's motion, there's movement happening. So, the examples we have just looked at, we're going from areas of high concentration, right? High concentration, out to the low concentrations. That's passive. That's diffusion. It happens automatically. We don't have to do anything. It just happens. There's no energy that was spent. It just happens. It's passive. But there's other situations in the body and in life and in physics where the opposite happens, where something that is going from a low concentration and has to get pumped to an area of high concentration. A good example of that is a soda can. They have to pump CO2 into it, even whenever there's way more CO2 inside the can than there is outside in the atmosphere surrounding the can. They pump it in, they force it in. Your kidneys, or not your kidneys, your small intestine does this whenever there's all this glucose in your intestine, but it still has food to take up. It's still going to take up that glucose from it, but it has to do it in an active way, which means it has to spend energy doing that. So again, passive transport, no energy. That's simple diffusion. We're going to learn about what's called osmosis, which is, spoiler alert, osmosis is just diffusion of water. And then facilitated diffusion, which, spoiler alert, that's just diffusion that uses a protein channel. Then we have what's known as active transport. Active transport requires ATP energy, and we have two forms of that typically that we're going to talk about, endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay? Oh, so again, passive is going to go from area of high concentration, down to the low concentration. That happens automatically. Think about a ball at the top of a hill. It's going to automatically roll down, right? Versus if there's a ball and you need to go up a hill, you're going to have to use some energy to push that up, right? You're going to have to use some energy. Or maybe a ball on a hill doesn't make sense. A child sitting at the top of a slide, or not even a child. I will sit on the slide. Miss Simon sitting on a slide. If I'm at the top, boom, I'm going to go. But if I'm at the bottom of a slide, I have to use some energy to try and climb up there. Same thing with molecules, right? From a high concentration, they can go down easily. It's passive. No energy is spent. But if they're trying to go the opposite way from a low concentration and force into a high concentration, that's going to require energy in the form of ATP. So let's look at what is active transport. Well, again, active transport is going from an area of low concentration and trying to force into high. I know I keep saying the same thing, but yeah. So an example of active transport in your body is forcing glucose, sugar, into the small intestine cells. You also need to know that active transport has two kind of forms. Sometimes we'll take, there's many more than this, but this is really what you need to know. Endocytosis and exocytosis. So endocytosis is exactly what it sounds like. Endo, it takes something in, right? Cell's going to eat something. It's going to take it in. Whereas exocytosis is when the cell's going to exile something. They're going to spit it out. Spit it out, not really, but that's kind of like what it looks like. So exo, pushing out, endo, taking in. Cyto means cell. Passive transport. So again, this is our types of transport. High to low and low to high. Passive transport. The two main types are going to be osmosis and diffusion. They're the exact same thing. They're passive transport, which means they're going to go from high, down the slide to low. Only difference is if I'm talking about water doing that, that's called osmosis. If I'm talking about literally anything else on planet Earth doing that, that's called diffusion. So this, diffusion. But if I were to have a water bottle, Jesus, that got in my eye. A water spray bottle, which there's nothing in here, but that would be osmosis. Okay. Osmosis is talking about water only. Diffusion is everything else in the world. Facilitated diffusion specifically, facilitated, if you put facilitated before diffusion, all that means is that it's using a protein channel of some sort. It needs some help. Facilitated diffusion is diffusion that requires a little bit of help. This typically just means that the molecule is too big to just kind of go in between the phospholipids. If it's too big, it's going to need a channel protein or a bridge to try and get in. Still going from high to low, still passive transport. It just uses a channel. So again, this is juice, smell, chlorine. It is diffusion. And if I'm talking about water, what is it called? Osmosis. Exactly. Good. You guys are doing so awesome. I know it's in the future, but I already know that you guys are doing awesome because, yeah. Practice problems. Let's do some practice. So in diffusion, the net movement of a substance travels down its concentration gradient. Explain using the image below. So explain to me what diffusion is and make sure that you use these words, otherwise it will not give you full credit. Here's what I said. In diffusion, molecules move with their concentration gradient from high down to low concentration. Which way should the arrows go? Well, the arrow should definitely go that way. It's going from high concentration down to low concentration. Good job. So simple diffusion can occur through a cell membrane. Does simple diffusion require an input of energy? No, it does not, and it is a passive process. All right, sometimes a substance can only travel across the cell membrane via facilitated diffusion. What is facilitated diffusion again? I've already forgotten. Hint. Facilitated diffusion is going to be movement from high to low, so diffusion, using a protein channel. Does facilitated diffusion require an input of energy? And is it passive or active transport? Diffusion never requires energy. Goes from high to low, no energy is required. And this is, of course, a passive process. All right, now let's get to the real practice problem. So diffusion is a critical process that is required for oxygen to leave the alveoli, so little sacs inside of your lungs, to enter the blood, and for carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, to leave your blood into the alveoli so you can breathe it out. Knowing what you know about how a substance travels in diffusion, in order for oxygen to leave the alveoli and enter the blood, there would be a blank concentration of oxygen in the alveoli compared to the blood. It's a whole lot of stuff. And y'all, at this point, you should hopefully know this about me. I am a huge proponent of drawing it out. Like, literally get a sticky note or something and draw it out. If you're trying to think about this through your head, you might mess up. Draw it out. There's also a picture here if you want to try and use that. So I'll move my face so it's not covering it. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and draw it out for you. Let's do this one together, and then you'll do the next one on your own. So I just drew something. The alveoli is a sac inside of your lung, and then this is a blood vessel, your bloodstream. Right? Cool. In the problem, it tells us that we are talking about oxygen leaving the alveoli and entering the blood. So I'm talking about something going from here to here. You with me? Good. So something is going from here to here, and it's diffusion. Where would the concentration be higher at? Well, the alveoli must be high, and the bloodstream must be low if I'm going in this direction, and it told me that it's diffusion. Okay. So again, in the problem, it told me oxygen is leaving the alveoli. That's how I know. That's how I knew which way to draw my arrow. It's leaving the alveoli and going into the blood. And the problem also told me that we're talking about diffusion. So it's going from high down to low. Next problem, you do it on your own. Well, bloodstream, alveoli. This time we're talking about something that is leaving the bloodstream and going into the alveoli. So our arrow is drawn the opposite way. It's still diffusion. So now the bloodstream has a high amount of carbon dioxide and the alveoli has a low amount of carbon dioxide, going from high to low. Okay. Another problem. So a student put together the experimental setup shown below. A selectively permeable membrane is permeable to both types of solute molecules shown. How would you expect the molecules to change over time in the diagram? Well, both types of molecules, so both molecule C and molecule D, are going to move so they can reach equilibrium. They're going to move so they can reach an equal amount. Nature loves to be balanced. Okay, so just to recap what we learned. Learn about the cell membrane, about the phospholipid bilayer. We also learned about passive transport, diffusion, and osmosis facilitate diffusion, and active transport, endo and exocytosis. Okay, other than that, high to low and low to high, high to low and low to high. So cool. Next lesson, we will do some more practice with this. So good job today. Thanks for coming back from spring break really strong. I really appreciate it.